Early in 1503, I was at Sinigalia, traveling with the army of Cesare Borgia, or Duke Valentino, as he was generally known. By that time, he had conquered all of Romagna, and I had been sent to assure him of Florence's neutrality. You see, we realized that if he decided to march against us, we would have no power to stop him. One day, to my utter astonishment, he turned to me and he said, "You know, Machiavelli, I've never been so afraid in my life."
Cesare Borgia confided that in you?
It isn't difficult to confide in someone who doesn't have any power over you. Now, his problem was that all of his officers were mercenaries, condottieri, as we called it, and they hadn't been paid. And now he had learned that they were plotting against him. His position had become precarious.
So what did he do?
He invited all 6 of them to a great banquet in the castle. He showed them great deference, praised them, showered them with gifts, acknowledged his great debt to them. And they, of course, assumed that they now had him at their mercy. Mm-hmm. Next morning, the castle was silent. Now, I assumed that they were all sleeping off the wine, but then in the afternoon, I saw 6 bodies carried from the castle.
What exactly had happened?
He had them strangled.
Well, how did you feel about that?
How did I feel? Well, I was amazed. But I couldn't help see it as a master stroke. From being a figurehead in the hands of mercenaries the night before, he was now sole commander of an enormous army. Absolute master of Central Italy. A power to be reckoned with. Even by France and Spain.
But weren't you shocked?
Shocked? Do you mean morally?
Yeah.
No. No, I don't believe I was. Should I have been?
Well, 500 years later, today, there's a consensus that, at least in theory, there's a thing called the rule of law.
In theory.
In theory, I mean, yes, I admit it's still a problem. And I have to admit that your book, The Prince, which holds Borgia up as the great exemplar, is still called a masterpiece of statecraft today, synonymous with your name.
What? The Prince?
Yeah, it's on university curricula everywhere. We even have a word, Machiavellian. Look, here's a book we call a dictionary. It didn't exist in your day, this kind of book. Gives the meaning of all the words in common use. Machiavellian, an unscrupulous schemer, one who practiced duplicity in statecraft.
One who practices duplicity in statecraft. My dear Mr. Watson, do you know anyone who doesn't practice duplicity in statecraft and survive? The Prince was meant to be a sort of guidebook, a bit sensational, perhaps. It was only ever intended for private publication.
So it might very well have just disappeared and been forgotten. But there was a queen in France, Catherine, a Medici, by the way, incredibly ruthless. And they said that your book was her Bible. So I guess that's what sealed its reputation as the handbook of the devil.
Dear me. Yes, well, if I remember The Prince correctly, it was about how things are, not about how things ought to be. It was about acquiring and retaining power.
She must have had some something in mind. You must have intended so. You knew it would create a scandal. I mean, I read about your deathbed scene in San Casciano. You were in exile. You were in despair. You said your life had been a failure. You said humanity was hopeless and futile. That does not sound like the death of an observer or a schemer. It sounds like the death of a disappointed idealist.
Well, now, I think we should get something clear. There was not much place for idealists in the Italy into which I was born, and I had very little sympathy with them. The 15th century was a very dark time.
Yeah, but we associate it now with excellence. We call it the famous Cinquecento, revival of art, the revival of learning.
Yes, there was all that, but it more or less floated on the top. In reality, life on the Italian peninsula was a very squalid business. Chaos, murder, clandestine alliances, depravity, greed. So you see, it wasn't really a time for lofty thoughts.
Where was Florence in all of this, your city?
We were in decline, undoubtedly. After the death of Il Magnifico, things deteriorated badly. I mean, we would have fits of republicanism, but there was no common identity, no cause.
You were born in 1469. You remembered all these things? You witnessed them?
Should I tell you one of my first memories?
Please.
I was 9 years old. One Sunday, during High Mass in the cathedral, assassins attacked the Medici brothers, Lorenzo and Giuliano. Lorenzo escaped, severely wounded. Giuliano was stabbed to death. Now, do you know what the signal was for the assassination attempt to begin? The ringing of the altar bell at the consecration.
At the very moment.
Yes, at the very most sacred instant of the essential Christian mystery, when the physical presence of Christ is made manifest. That was the signal for the killing to begin. And do you know who sent the assassins? Oh, at any rate, he condoned their actions. The Vicar of Christ on earth, Pope Sextus IV. So, a dark time. And as I say, after the death of Lorenzo, things got even worse. Crime, well, our house had a third floor, and I would watch from the window, and I would sometimes see a mob of boys on the verge of victory, when suddenly a fight would break out among their leaders. Then the other gang, in retreat, would pretend a truce, and then suddenly take the would-be victors from behind in a hail of stones. Cleverness, but to what avail? There is the story of Italy. Cleverness and failure. Failure because of indiscipline, because of disorganization, because of greed, because of sensuality.
But didn't you have some concept, some image of how things ought to be?
Do you want to see the results of idealism? Look at the Florentine Republic of 1512.
That was one of the first republics ever back in the 13th century.
Yes. In name, yes, but it never lasted. Idealists. No, I would wager that idealists and saints have done more damage than people like Cesare Borgia or Charles VIII.
Machiavelli, you've said that saints and idealists have caused more harm than tyrants like the Borgias. Why?
They lead their followers into traps, provoke martyrdom, cause riots and massacres by disappointed crowds. Look at Savonarola.
Savonarola, he was that...
A monk, Florentine mystic. In the Power Vacuum, after the death of Lorenzo, Savonarola appeared preaching reform of the church. speaking out against the corruptions of the Pope, of the old oligarchy of the Medici, wealthy merchants, preaching a return to the true Florentine Republic. All good Christian stuff and very well received. What came of it? A reaction against him as a false prophet, torture of his followers, and in the end, the Pope scared the people into burning him as a heretic.
You witnessed that too?
Perhaps the worst thing was that the crowd that burned him had no idea anymore what it believed in. So all you had was this little man hanging from a gibbet, engulfed in flames and black smoke and screams, all in this sort of awful emptiness.
All the same, he did expose corruption.
Oh, his downfall was not in his message. It was just that he was a prophet unarmed. Had he had military force, he would have been formidable.
So if he'd had an army, you would have supported his message.
No, that was the point. True Christians were never armed in those days.
Also, you had something to say for Christianity.
You really want to attach me to some party or faction or something, don't you?
Well, you know, your whole life suggests that you were working towards something.
What, that I had an ulterior motive?
Beyond the lessons of power, beyond the prince itself. I think, in fact, the prince was a stepping stone, that you wrote it for the Medici to get yourself in favor with them when they retained control of Florence.
I had no love for the Medici, if that's what you're getting at. But I did need a position. I needed work.
Yeah, but you wanted more than the position. Come on.
If I'd wanted power, I would have tried to be a prince. If I'd wanted wealth, I would have been a merchant. If I wanted security, I was already a lawyer.
How about influence?
Influence in those days.
When you finished your legal training, you were taken on as a secretary and second chancellor to the Florentine Republic. You hoped to make a difference.
To make a difference? I just pushed a quill.
Pushed a quill. You got an education there. You formed opinions.
Ideals. That's what you're getting at, isn't it?
Then they made you an envoy, an ambassador.
Do you know what the diplomatic service was like in those days?
I know what it's like now. It's quite luxurious. We call it a plum job. But I'm not talking about money.
It was fascinating.
Yeah, of course, it was fascinating.
Well, of course, to provide advice to Florence also.
Yeah, but what was the ultimate...
To provide advice that was both constructive and uncompromising. Look, for example, we had to dominate Pisa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the council said, well, what do we do about the opposition there? And I said, well, we're at war with them. We have to exterminate them, put in our own people. And they were astonished that anyone would say such a thing. And there was all this uncomfortable laughter. Because, you see, officially, this was Christendom, and we were Christians under the papacy, etc., etc. Now, although they recognized the wisdom of what I was saying, they were squeamish and watered it down, with the result that what should have been a short war became a long, sordid, protracted struggle, and nothing ever changed. So I had to look at it all with a sense of humor. I certainly didn't gain anything from it.
You were definitely anti-clerical.
If you knew our clergy, God himself would have been anti-clerical in those days.
Your father was not only anti-clerical, he really lived the loose life in Florence, didn't
Yes,
he?
and my mother was deeply pious, fanatically Catholic.
Yeah, but your father and you made fun of her. Your father told bawdy stories about priests.
Listen, how could you not be anti-clerical? It wasn't a matter of opinion that the papacy was meant to be an exemplar of virtue, while politically it had become nothing more than another jackal fighting over carrion. Here you have the Pope demanding all these expedient alliances in the name of Christ, when everyone knew he was sleeping with his sister and proclaiming celibacy and making his sons into priests and then defrocking them so that they could fight wars for him. And then on top of it all, there was this, people put up with it because of this glaze of false piety, which of course had its own advantages.
Go on.
There's no idealism here. just fact. You won't get me spouting any doctrine.
So let me ask you something about evil. Does evil exist?
Of course. And I'm very explicit about it in The Prince, am I not?
Yeah.
Do I not say that the prince must, if possible, do good, but know how to do evil if necessary?
Evil always seems to be necessary.
No. I said many times. Evil must be timely, must be precise, must be used in exact measure. You see, it's only when cruelty becomes a habit, an indulgence, you know?
Mm-hmm.
When you despoil your people, take their women, tax them to death, that's when the people turn against you and you lose your kingdom. I've always said, a prince must do everything possible to be loved.
But if he can't be loved, he should be feared, because love can be betrayed or abused, and fear can't. I'm going to hand you a bitter pill. In my time, 500 years after you, we've had our own tyrants, a lot bigger than yours. Napoleon in the 19th century, but in this century, two far worse. Hitler and Stalin, Russian and a German. Between them, they murdered about 50 million people. And they all read The Prince.
I imagine that by then it didn't teach them anything they didn't already know. And I would like to think that other better-intentioned people read it and used it.
They have reformers, revolutionaries.
Didn't I say somewhere that if I have shown tyrants how to oppress peoples, I've also shown peoples how to overthrow tyrants?
Yeah, but when you wrote The Prince...
Listen, all I'm trying to do is ask you to look at history, at strategy. And all you want to do is give me ideals, commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Do you realize the crimes that have been committed in the name of those commandments? By Christianity, by its clergy, by its aristocracy.
Machiavelli, who had the ear of dukes and princes, I think you really favored the middle and the lower classes, didn't you?
I found it difficult to stay at home, to the point that I would walk out into the streets and observe. I would listen to the conversation of the prostitutes. I found it very refreshing after all the sanctimonious equivocation of my job. And I would meet friends and play cards in the tavern. Because my whole point is this. What is the object of life, really, if not to observe? If you think of it?
1512, Florence, the Republic collapses. There's nobody in charge. You're 43, the height of your career, full of ideas, frustrated. Now, if you were the master strategist that your reputation says you are, and if you were really devoted to nothing but the survival and prestige of Florence, how is it that in the worst crisis of your life you failed to survive by any of your own prescriptions?
I don't believe I had any choice.
Of course you had a choice. Spain and the Pope had decided to put the Medici back. There was a power vacuum. And you, I don't get it. You made the mistake of talking to the opponents of the Medici, the Republicans.
I was talking to everyone.
They were conspirators. They were dangerous bedfellows. If you were really interested in survival or just in observing...
I observed everyone.
Well, you paid a price for whatever it was you're talking about, because when you finally switched your bet to the Medicis, the Republicans had put your name down on a list of conspirators.
Without my permission. I'd never given them...
I understand that, but the Medici got hold of the list, and they decided you'd shown your true colors. You were Republican, you wanted democracy. They arrested you, imprisoned you, tortured you, sent you into exile. That's when you wrote The Prince. I'm going to make an assumption, and you can defend yourself or just let me decide. But when you were in exile, you went on your walks to observe the rabble in the local town. But on the way you were reading Petrarch, you read Dante's Divine Comedy.
Only the hell part, not the paradise part.
When you got home at night, your real life began. You took off the old clothes of the clerk that you still wore and changed into the clothes of the powerful courtier that you never became. And you communed with the powerful, and the dead, and the great, and you wrote your works between the town and the study, between the low and the brutal, between the high and the humane.
They were not mutually exclusive, you know.
Well, there was the Prince, cut and dry but brutal. And there was another less well-known book, The Discourses on Livy. And in the Discourses on Livy, you used the history of the old Republic of Rome to hold it up as an example for your own times of the virtue not just of a republic, but of democracy, the wisdom of the people. In your earlier professional life in the anarchy of Italy in 1500, you knew this wasn't a realistic choice. The people would have laughed at you. And even in exile, you were praising Cesare Borgia and the Prince. See, I'm proposing there's a link here, and that link is the last section of the Prince, because suddenly you're making an address to some unknown savior. Some say it was the next Medici. An appeal to him to use the ideas in your book to rescue Italy from popes and foreigners and anarchy.
You're right, insofar as I was not trying to ingratiate myself with Medici. I hoped to use him.
I think you wanted him to be a Cesare Borgia. You wanted another Borgia to do the dirty work of uniting Italy by conquest and throwing out the French and the Spanish, containing the Pope. And that would be the condition for a national republic and a democracy that would deliver the people of Italy. You were way ahead of your time.
You have a real affection for democracy, don't you?
Italy's united. Italy is a democratic republic. When you were dying, you spoke of the struggle for your soul, and on one side were the virtuous, the downtrodden, the poor, trying to pull you up to heaven. On the other side, the great and powerful trying to drag you down to hell. And you said you'd rather go to hell.
I'd had it with the virtuous. And besides, who wants to be bored?
Niccolò Machiavelli was born 23 years before Columbus sailed to America. His book, The Prince, has been almost continually in print since its first publication. A stern critic of the Catholic Church, Machiavelli died in 1527 with the comforts of religion.